Guys, welcome back to another video. Hope you're all having a great day and welcome to the second part of this redraft series that I'll be doing. And I think I might stop at like 2021, maybe 2020. Like, I don't want to go that far back into the past and like continue to do these redrafts. Unless you guys like them, then I can. But with no further ado, let's get into a 2024 redraft. If you haven't seen the 2025 one, I'll link it at the end of this video so you guys can check that one out. So with no further ado, let's get into it. Starting off with the number one pick. I know a lot of people are going to want me to say Drake May because he had the MVP year, but I'm still going Caleb. In my opinion, the best um, player from this class so far. I think Caleb so far has been the best player. And he was taken first overall for a reason. Like kind of the same thing I said with Cam Ward last week when I did the 2025 redraft. He was taken first for a reason, and I'm not going to fault. Like I'm not going to pick Jaden or Drake just because they had more spectacular years compared to Caleb when he's still, in my opinion, the best quarterback from this class. No argument there. Moving on to number two, I think it's interesting. You could say Jaden, and I wouldn't hate that because I wouldn't hate that because he was a second overall pick. He had the great rookie year. Did have a step down, but he was injured a lot, so it's not like really he had a sophomore slump. He was just banged up and wasn't as effective. But I'm gonna go with Drake May. I think he was my second quarterback from this class ahead of Jaden. So, I mean, as a great sophomore year, didn't deserve to win MVP. Stafford did, but still had an amazing year. Helped New England make it to the Super Bowl. I think Drake has proven enough. You could have him go one. I wouldn't hate that. I still, I, I just think Caleb was the better quarterback and better player than May. Moving on to number three with the Pats. I think it's Jaden Daniels. I know he had a banged up um, sophomore year, and people are going to be like, oh, is he going to be able to make it in the league? I think he will. I think he bulks up, a new offense this year. And Cliff Kingsbury, kind of known for like the running ability for quarterbacks, helping them out, isn't the great isn't the greatest after one season. We saw that with the Cardinals because we saw that in 2020 when Arizona started off great and then fizzled out because teams figured them out. Even in 2021, and it was the same thing with Jaden. Like if he's healthy, he will be an elite quarterback, no doubt. And I don't think one injury plague season should make you say, "Oh, Jaden shouldn't be going this high." Some people think he's the top quarterback. I think that's Caleb, Drake, and then Jaden, but you can have it in whatever order, and I wouldn't care. We're not a four with the Cardinals. This is where it gets interesting because you're not going to go Marv. You could go receiver with Neighbors. He's probably because Doomsday's been all right, but he's not worth this high. BTJ, yeah, disappointing sophomore campaign. Lad, um, really good. You could go Neighbors, but I'm honestly gonna go tackle. I'm gonna go with. I'm gonna go Joel, which I know it's like what, but yeah, I mean, at the time, Arizona, who still does need tackle help, could have gone out and drafted Joe Alt. Like, there's no quarterback you could take. You could say Bo Nix, and I wouldn't hate it, but they still had Kyler, and I'm trying to keep these redrafts at least making sense for like what the team would do back then, not looking to like the future. They drafted Paris Johnson the year prior. Joe Alt was drafted to a team that already had a left tackle, even though he played left tackle at Notre Dame and was moved over to the right side. And I think would be a phenomenal fit and would give the Cardinals team two elite tackles for at least a couple of seasons of Kyler, and then for their future quarterback in the league, whoever that is going to be. So I think Jolt's the pick. I know he was banged up this past year, but was still really good. And a Cardinals team that, like, you could go Neighbors, but I feel like addressing the O line makes more sense. Moving on to the Chargers, I think it also comes down between Neighbors or one of the tackles, and I would go Fashanu. I mean, he's been amazing for the um he's been amazing for the Jets. A true elite left tackle. He was my top tackle ahead of Alt. I think Alt's been better, but the Chargers, who drafted a left tackle, which Fashanu is, put him at right tackle and he was fine. Now you could say, maybe he isn't fine and it doesn't work out, but the Chargers chose to protect Justin Herbert, which was the smart decision. Like, I like what the Bengals did back in 21, drafting Chase over Sewell. I think it's more the better option to go tackle over receiver because you can protect your franchise quarterback for the long term. So I'm going to go Fashanu, who can be that guy opposite of Rashawn Slater. And you don't get all, but you still get a really good tackle. But on to the Giants at 6. I think this is where Neighbors ends up. Still a really talented player. Injuries plagued him this past year, but is still really good. And I think the Giants would change the pick. And I honestly wouldn't hate if you had Neighbors going to the Cardinals or to the Chargers at 4 or 5. I just think tackle is more of a priority. So I think Neighbors fitting with the Giants, it's the most sense. We're on to the Titans at 7. I mean, I think you could go Bo Nix, and I wouldn't hate it because Will Levis didn't work out. They obviously landed Cam Ward, so I feel like that cancels it out. You could go with the tackle, Talisi Fuaga, um, be the guy. Um, at this point, you could go receiver. Maybe you do go BTJ or Lad with this pick. But I think I am going to go with Fuaga, the tackle. Tennessee originally drafted J.C. Latham, who has been a bust so far. I was not high on Latham. I think the only tackle I had ahead of him was Amarius Mims and Tyler Gay, who ended up going the first round. And while he still can turn his career around, was much better later after once Brian Callahan was fired. So maybe he does turn around, but I think Tennessee would easily take Fuaga. Yeah. Moving on to the Falcons at 8. I think this is where they would submit the pick of Jared Verse. Laiatu Latu could be a possible. You could go Laiatu Latu, even Chop Robinson, but Verse has been the best defensive player from this class. Him and Quinion Mitchell and some other guys that we'll get to. But Atlanta needed pass rush. It still baffles me to this day that they went quarterback with Cousins, like signing Cousins and then drafting Penix, because they either could have use that money with Cousins to bring in, an edge rusher, a corner. Like they could have gone out and brought in some impact players and drafted Penix, or they could have used that eighth overall pick to draft an edge rusher. Yes, Cousins ended up being banged up at the end of the year, so it was a good thing they had Penix, but now Penix is injured and they run a Tua. I'm talking about all of that stuff that's happening for agency next week. But I think they would easily go verse. Like he makes the most sense and a needed pass rush needed to help this team out. I think verse would have been the easy selection. But under the Bears at 9, I think you could consider a receiver. They did go receiver. I don't know if you would go tackle, even though that was a big need, even to this day at left tackle. But I'm gonna go with um defense. Yeah, I'm gonna go defense, and I'm gonna go Laiatu Latu. I mean, he is he was the first defensive player drafted from this class to the Colts at 15. He's been amazing through his first 2 years, even though Indy's been a train wreck through the first couple of years of his career. And but the Bears have needed that secondary pass rush. They traded for Montez Sweat, who isn't a true edge one where like he's gonna attack, but they kind of always needed another guy on the other side. I thought they were gonna do it with the 10th pick. They ended up going Colston Loveland, which worked out, but I feel like they should have gone edge, and it's been a real need for this team for a while, ever since they moved on, or since they traded for Sweat, they've needed another pass rusher, and Latu makes a lot of sense for this um Bears team. What are the Jets at 10? I think I'm going to go with Brock Bowers. This was what a lot of people were mocking to the Jets. Though they made the right choice going with tackle, but there's no tackles available that I would take this high. But they needed weapons. They had Garrett Wilson at the time, obviously Brees Hall, but not much else. And Bowers would have given Aaron Rodgers and whoever else in this alternate timeline, they would have had a quarterback, elite tight end out there alongside Garrett Wilson in the passing game to help out the Jets. They have a young core on offense of Wilson, Paul, and Bowers build around. Went on to the Vikings at 11. I think you could go Bo Nix. Um, and I wouldn't hate that, but they had Sam Darnold at the time. I think if you were to like redraft it based off of like what the team did, Bo Nix would probably go um either here, maybe 7, maybe the Jets. But we're kind of using like saying what would the Vikings do if they were to redraft, knowing who's on the roster now. They have Sam Darnold, who yes, they don't know will work out, but they have him. So I think they would go in a different direction. And I think they would go with Quinion Mitchell. They've kind of needed, you know, good corners on this team for a while. And I think Minnesota would have used these two first to address other needs outside of QB. And I think it would have worked out for them if they had done that. Obviously, JJ McCarthy could end up, working out. We all saying he's a draft bust. We look wrong. You know, they just signed Kyler Murray last night, so I in a redraft, saying they have Sam Darnold, they'd rather go with other positions instead of trying to address um trying to address that quarterback position. Went on 212. I got Bo Nix. Kind of the last QB I'll probably have going in the first round. Because, yeah, Penix and McCarthy just have not been good. And I don't think a team would risk drafting a guy who, through the first 2 years of his career has not really been the greatest. And I think, Denver kind of stole Bo Nix. The Raiders kind of needed a quarterback, and Denver kind of got lucky. I mean, he did have a kind of downward, regression from rookie to sophomore year, but I think that was more so due to Sean Payton being more involved, and I think with Davis Webb being the OC, I think Knicks can get back to that rookie form, and the offense can be more complementary to the defense than it was this past year. What are the Raiders? Obviously, not going to go tight end. I don't think there's another one in this class worth first round talent. Receiver is a possibility because obviously later would trade Devontae Adams, so you can say that. But I'm going to go with um, defensive lineman. I'm going Byron Murphy. They've kind of needed a secondary defensive lineman, aside from Max Crosby, to get after the quarterback. Thought that was Tyree Wilson. Has not worked out. And I think without Bowers on the board, without a quarterback to draft, I think the Raiders would go and get Byron Murphy and help out this interior defensive line. You could go corner for like DeJean, Nate Wiggins, McKinstry, um, Kamari Lassiter. There's a lot of young guys in this corner class that I'll be having going. So you could go with one of those guys because Vegas has had a need at corner for a while. But I think Murphy gives them an instant impact guy on that D line to help out Crosby and really give this Raiders team, a defensive line that can fortify. So yeah, put on the Saints at 14. Obviously, not going to go with Talishi Fuller. He's off the board. Could say, you could go with one of the tackles. And I wouldn't hate it. But I think, with, what we know now about this team, I think, they probably would rather go in a different direction to help out this um defense. And I'm gonna go with who was my number one corner, Nate Wiggins. They trade Marshawn Lattimore during the 2024 season, and they drafted Kool-Aid McKinstry, who has worked out. You could go in with this pick, but Wiggins had not a down sophomore season, but wasn't as talked about as 2024 because of how injured and bad the Ravens defense was. Wiggins is still one of the best young corners in this class. I think the Saints, knowing that they're going to lose guys like Paulson Adebo, Alante Taylor, and trade away Marshawn Lattimore, obviously they would go with corner. And I know I said earlier talking about like hindsight and like knowing would perform. Obviously, we didn't know that, but like in a redraft, knowing that they would lose those guys eventually, I think they would go draft corner and address the need now. Colts at 15. I think you know I think this could be wide receiver because they drafted AD Mitchell later on and he didn't work out. Obviously, Michael Pittman is no longer a part of the team, but they have Alec Pierce and Josh Downs. I think this is probably defensive oriented, and I'm gonna go Chop. who surprised me as a rookie, had a down sophomore year, but so did mostly Miami's defense did. And I think, Indy would still get the same production as Leatu Latu and Chop, who's younger and less injury concerns, um, would give this team um a better um chance to maybe win for the future. But on to the 16th overall pick, Seattle not going to get Byron Murphy. Could go, interior offensive line, which they in the following draft, and I wouldn't hate. Could go a lot of different positions for the Seattle team. Possibly could go linebacker because maybe they traded for Ernest Jones halfway through the year, so maybe they try to address that need now. But I think I would go with Braden Fisk out of Florida State. Addressing that interior defensive line, which a lot of people thought they were going to do with Jalen Carter in the prior year. Um, didn't. Went to Von Witherspoon, which was an amazing pick, but um, not going to get Byron Murphy, but Braden Fisk has been still one of the best defensive linemen from this class and would still, help the Seattle defense out in ways that Murphy was able to do. Went on to the Jags at 16. Obviously went BTJ, which honestly could be the pick if you want it to be. But I'm going a different direction. I think position they've kind of needed to improve for a little bit. That they have, but it's corner. And I'm going to go Cooper DeJean. Yeah, I was a big advocate for the Jags like during this drafting process to get a corner. Like yes, they lost Calvin Ridley and you're gonna have to replace him, but the corners they had, like it was Tyson Campbell and then not much else. And it kind of felt like the Jags needed a secondary corner. And so DeJean, who was phenomenal for the Eagles, a guy who made big play after big play. I think would help out this Jack secondary. And they ended up signing, I forget who from the Cowboys last offseason 2025 to really play that nickel role. And instead they could have landed DeJean to play that nickel role and they could have used that money elsewhere elsewhere to help out this team. Bengals at 18, wet Marius Mims. Maybe you still think they need to address the offensive line, which they do, but I think easy pick here is to go defense. Yeah, I think it comes down to which position, and I would specifically go with the secondary. Um, a guy like Kalen Bullock, um, at safety could be an option. You look at, but they should address corner with Mr. Kool-Aid McKinstry. Um, the Bengals have needed a lot of defensive help for a while. Um, yes, they had Cam Taylor, Britt, and DJ Turner at the time, but Britt kind of is an on and off guy where like sometimes he's really good, other times he's not that great. Turner's pretty underrated, but they've needed more corner help to stop some of those guys. And who knows, maybe if their secondary was better, maybe that defensive line, that front seven would have been able to, make plays. And we wouldn't be talking about the Bengals having to fire Lueno because of how bad the defense was, and instead we're talking about Cincinnati possibly making a run right back to the Super Bowl. But under the Rams at 19, not going to get either Jared Verse or Braden Fisk. Oh, could say go D line or edge, but I don't think either of those positions are really the greatest. Obviously, not going to go quarterback. You know, I think maybe if these guys were available, they might have taken them. I think they would go with possibly wide receiver, possibly um, offensive line, and then possibly the secondary. And I think they had Coop and Puka, but this was Coop's last year. I think they would go receiver. I would go BTJ. Still had the amazing rookie year, and I know we had a lot of drops and wasn't that great. This past um season, but still had a really talented player, and I think would be able to complement Puka Nakua. And maybe, they don't have to pay Adams, or maybe if they do, then they have three elite receivers instead of just two. And then they could have been able to address other needs. But on to Pittsburgh, I think the offensive line will be a priority. Receiver, also a big need. Obviously, quarterback is always, um, they could go a lot of different directions. I am going to have them go offensive line with Marius Mims, a Georgia boy, who would actually be paired up with his Georgia teammate Broderick Jones, who would be on the other side. I think Mims has still, been a solid tackle. He kind of turned into form later on, in the 2025 season, and could grow in 26. And I think Pittsburgh, who needed offensive line help, you could go running back with like Bucky Irving or somebody like that. Bucky probably the only far down. Jeez, how far is he down? Is he even listed? Not missing? Oh, there he is. I think offensive line was a big need, and Mims still fills a hole for this team. What are the Dolphins who went Chop Robinson? I think there's an edge. You could say Dallas Turner because of the potential. I think defensive tackle is a big need, and maybe go Sweat or somebody like that. But I'm gonna go with offensive line, which has been a huge issue for this team. And I'm gonna go Graham Barton. Yeah, I mean Barton had a rough sophomore year, but so did most of Tampa Bay's offense. And I think in Miami, who's needed to help out because like when Tua had his best year in 2023, the offensive line was one of the best, and I think they lost guys, in the interior, um, to free agency, and didn't really replace them with good players. And I think Barton would have helped out this Dolphins offensive line and would have protected Tua better, so maybe he would have been able to replicate that success, and he wouldn't have been cut just 2 years later. Went on to the Eagles corner. They went Quinion Mitchell, and there are some corners down the board. Lassiter, who I think could be first round picks. They also, could possibly go safety, edge. I think I'm gonna go corner with Kamari Lassiter, really two Texans DBs that were selected in this class. And yeah, I mean they lose out on both DeJean and Quinion Mitchell, so obviously gonna have to bring in somebody who can still be able to be as good of a player I think Lassiter can be. And I think Eagles would still be able to get that same production, but just not big of a name. But out of the Vikings, who obviously went with Quinion Mitchell at 11, now I think they would address um different need. Could go offensive line, which is a possibility. They have needed a lot of interior offensive line play. Could go defensive line, could go safety to eventually replace Harrison Smith, just go all secondary players. Could go receiver. I think I'm gonna go with JPJ, Jackson Powers Johnson, who has kind of had a weird, interesting career so far because like like when he was a prospect, a lot of people were saying he was going to be like a center guard, but he's kind of been moved around under two regimes in Vegas in 24 and 25. Finally, hopefully under Clint Kubiak, um he'll be able to stay at one spot in Minnesota, did need um who did need interior offensive line play, because maybe if they get more protection for Sam Darnold, who knows how far they could have gone. But the Cowboys at 24, I think, you know, could go a lot of different directions. Could go receiver. Remember, they only had CeeDee Lamb at this time. Brandon Cooks was deteriorated, and then they went ahead and had to trade anything or tag the player. Could go offensive line like they did. Could go defense, but I think I'm actually gonna go with Rome Odunze. Actually, I'm gonna go not Odunze. I'll go McConkey, who had a disappointing sophomore year, like a lot of these players did. Um, from this class had different disappointing sophomore years, but yeah, I mean, had CD at the time. Obviously, we're about to pay Dak. So needed to address. Um, Although you could go running back with Bucky Irving, and I would hate it, but they'd be able to get McConkey on a rookie contract, so they wouldn't have to pay him until 2027, which would have freed up some cap space, and then they wouldn't have needed to trade it for George Pickens, give up those picks. So I think it would work out. But on to Green Bay at 25. Corner was, you know, a lot of people's picks for the Packers. So, but I don't really think there's any guy worth taking. Like maybe Singer still, but he had disappointing. Maybe TD Tampa or Max Melton. Um, but I think offensive tackle could be a position, maybe interior offensive line. But I'm gonna go with Odunze. Back to back receivers. Green Bay has needed a true wide receiver one for a while. Not saying Odunze is that, but he could have been that and given this Packers offense another guy out there to help this team out. But out of the Bucks at 26, obviously with Graham Barton, so not going to get him. But I think you still get a pretty good center and Zach Frazier. I mean, you could go defense with you could go linebacker, and there are a couple guys here who I would consider going in the first round. You could go possibly um, with defensive line or edge rusher, and I wouldn't hate it, but they invested into this offensive line to protect Baker after extending him that offseason. And Zach Frazier, who's been a really solid center for the Steelers, makes it in. What are the Cardinals at 27 obviously went with Joe Alt. So could go Marvin Harrison Jr. here and still be able to get the player just that not as high of a pick. But I think they go in a different direction. Um, could go interior offensive line. Cooper Beebe um, is a possibility. Maybe Dominic Pooney, who was really good. Um, Mason McCormick for the Steelers. Um, like a Tanner Bornolini for the Colts. I would hate that. Could go defense and um help out this entire defense. But I think I'm actually gonna go interior offensive line with Dominic Pony. Kind of fortify that offensive line. You get Joe Walt, you get Dominic Pony, you get two offensive linemen to protect Kyler. And maybe if they were able to protect him more, maybe he's playing better, and maybe this offense is better off. We're on 228 with the Bills. But you can say this is a clear wide receiver. Um, and I wouldn't hate it. But if you're gonna go with like a lot of these guys, I mean you could say Jalen McMillan, who um banged up sophomore year but was really good in 2024. Could say um I don't know who else. Maybe you go Marv, but I think the Bills, like their big issue is receiver, but I'm gonna talk myself into redrafting this with Marv. Imagine Marvin Harrison Jr. with Josh Allen. And he can still be the player. Like I still believe he can be the player that everybody says he will be, or says like he was going to be. It's just he needs a good offensive mind, a good quarterback, and it can work out. And he was banged up this past year, but his rookie year was still really good. Like it wasn't to the numbers that a lot of people wanted him to be, but it was still a really good rookie wide receiver season. And so I think in this redraft, he still goes in the first round, just later on to a team that would be able to use his skill set better. And maybe instead of throwing to Brandon Cooks or all these other guys, it's Marvin Harrison Jr. And he's making those plays that his dad made. We're on the Lions at 29. Obviously, went Terry Arnold and could do that, but unlike Marv, Arnold just has not had really any good moments. Could go with some of these other guys down here, but I think I'm gonna go Dallas Turner, the edge rusher. You know, had a disappointing rookie year though, was behind both Grenard and Andrew Van Ginkel, so it makes sense that he wasn't going to see the field a lot, but played a lot more in 2025 and was tremendous. And the Lions, who have needed a secondary pass rusher, can get that with Turner and really help this defense out to flourish for years. The Ravens at 30. Um, this could be offensive line. They could go Guyton, Fatanu, maybe JC Latham. Actually, I'm gonna go Latham. I mean, he was more of a right tackle, which is what the Ravens needed. And maybe in Baltimore, he could have had a better start to his career. And maybe the Ravens have their future right tackle of the future in the first round. We're on the Niners at 31. Maybe wished Marv was available here. Well, there are still, some guys you could maybe consider going with. But I think, offensive line was a huge issue for this Niners team. Not going to get Dominic Pooney. So I think they go with Mason McCormick to help out this interior offensive line and really help protect Brock Purdy. And then finally, the Super Bowl winners that year, the Chiefs, 32nd overall, went Xavier Worthy. I don't think they end up going with him. I think they'd probably go in a different direction. I think possibly offensive line because, they needed Because, I mean, they needed interior offensive line play. Well, not really. They needed better tackle play. So could go. I'm going to go Tyler Guyton. I still think, actually, go Troy Fatanu, who could have been that left tackle of future a year earlier, and maybe the Chiefs used their 2025 first on a different position, and they end up being a lot better. So yeah, Troy Fatanu to finish out this 2024 NFL redraft. Hope you guys have a great day. Hope you guys like, comment, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. And I'll catch you guys in the next video. But until then, hope you have a great day and bye.